Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Tara here. If you're new, my name is Tara and I am a third-year medical student in the graduate entry medical program at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, here in the beautiful Dublin, Ireland. I am Canadian, but I am hoping to practice medicine back in North America at the end of my studies in Ireland. And this is a series that kind of documents kind of my life in medical school. I also make videos where I do music. You can check those out at my Tunes with Tara playlist. I would highly recommend it, but let's get right into the video. So this video is all about my experience with the USMLE Step 1. So for those of you who don't know, the USMLE is the United States Medical Licensing Exam. It's an exam that all medical students take if they're seeking to practice medicine in the United States. Doesn't matter where you study. If you study in the US, in Canada, in Ireland like I do, the Caribbean, Australia, it doesn't matter. Students still take the USMLE if they're planning on practicing back in the United States. This is kind of going to be my debrief now that I have taken the exam. I took the exam back in late August of this year. This is just kind of my video going over what I did during each of kind of my phases of studying, how I think it worked for me, and if there's anything I would do differently. So, getting right into the video, let's start with pre-dedicated. So for people who are unfamiliar, USMLE studying is usually broken down into two phases, as I would call them. There's your pre-dedicated study period and your dedicated study period. Your pre-dedicated study period is usually when you still have other commitments or you're still in school. So for example, my pre-dedicated study period was while my semesters were still running in medical school. So my pre-dedicated study period was from September of 2019 until June of 2020. That's a large chunk of time. However, I still had to devote a lot of time to studying in school because school was still running, the semester was still going, I still had my semester exams. So here are some of the resources that I used during my pre-dedicated period. I used First Aid for the USMLE, which is a textbook that a lot of students use. I would say most students use this textbook. I used the 2019 version. I also used the associated online platform, USMLE RX. USMLE RX has a lot of different resources built into the program, ranging from flashcards to a question bank. They've got this platform called Bricks, which is like a teaching tool, a learning tool, and then they've also got videos. So I started off using the videos and I really liked them at first, but then I found that they didn't quite tackle things quite as conceptually as I wanted to, so I switched over to using Boards and Beyond, which is the next thing I'm going to talk about. Boards and Beyond is a video lecture series that I used along with my boyfriend. Boards and Beyond covers topics in a really great manner. I really liked the way that Dr. Ryan approached all of the topics. He goes over it in a both in-depth way while trying to be as concise as possible and hitting on all of the high points that you need to know. It goes a little bit more in depth than the videos from USMLE RX, that's what I found, and I really appreciated that. Kind of moving on to other video lecture series, RCSI provides its students with a copy of Pathoma if they're planning on taking the USMLE. So we got a copy of Pathoma, which is a textbook that focuses on the study of pathology, as well as the associated video lecture series with Dr. Sitar. I can't tell you the number of times that Dr. Sitar's voice popped into my head during the actual test. Dr. Sitar and Pathoma is a kind of A++ series. It's kind of one of those must-dos for the USMLE, would highly recommend. So then there's a couple of more resources that I used. I used a lot of resources, so it was a lot to balance. The next one I used was Sketchy, which is a kind of video mnemonic system. I also used a video mnemonic system called Pixorize near the end of my pre-dedicated period and early on in my dedicated period. I liked Sketchy a little bit more than I liked Pixorize, but they cover two different topics, so that was fine with me. I used Sketchy for pharmacology and for microbiology, and really, it's a lifesaver. The one thing I will say about Sketchy is that you never really look at your day-to-day life the same way again after using Sketchy. Like, I'm walking down the street and I see all these little black birds, and the first thing I think of is macrolides, not, ooh, look at all these little black birds. No, macrolides, because macrolides. I digress. The next thing I used was also provided by RCSI, and I used it a little bit at the beginning, but after a while, I stopped using it because I didn't find it quite as helpful, and that resource is Amboss. So Amboss is a system that also has learning tools built in. It also has flashcards. It's also a Q bank. I used the question bank, and I found that the questions had a much higher difficulty level than, for example, USMLE RX, which is great. However, I found that based on a lot of reading that I had done, and after I done quite a few of the questions. It seemed like AMBOSS was more geared to the USMLE Step 2 CK versus the USMLE Step 1. And I was already using USMLE RX and really enjoying that platform and really enjoying that question bank. So I decided to stick with that and give AMBOSS a break because it was already so much trying to juggle all of them. And that brings me to the last resource I used during pre-dedicated, and I found it a absolute lifesaver, and that is Cram Fighter. You guys have heard me talk about Cram Fighter so much on this channel, but I really cannot tell you how much this program has like changed my life. It's made planning my day so much easier because it just tells you what you need to study. That way you cover all of the material and you make sure that you cover it before your test day. So that was absolute lifesaver. I used it a lot more during pre-dedicated than I did in dedicated, only because my days in dedicated were, I wouldn't say a lot more structured, but I did the same thing every day. In a test like the USMLE, where you're using so many resources all at the same time, it can be hard to feel like you can get through everything. And I think one of my biggest regrets was not starting Cram Fighter sooner. I really, looking back, wished that I'd started it back in September. I didn't start using Cram Fighter until a few months into my study period, so not until like January or February. I really regret that. I really wish that I'd used it sooner because I feel like I would have been a little bit more on top of things by the end of my dedicated period. And if you want to try Cram Fighter, they do have a free trial that they offer for 7 days. Highly recommend that. And if you stay to the end of the video, I have a coupon code for you for Cram Fighter that they've gladly offered to share with you guys. So now I'm gonna talk about my dedicated study period. So dedicated is where you have nothing else that you're doing. All that you're doing, you're living, eating, breathing, sleeping the USMLE Step 1. I did my dedicated period from about like June 5th until August 20th, because that was my test day. My test day was August 20th. The resources that I used during my dedicated were much more pared down than the ones I used during pre-dedicated. Pre-dedicated, you're trying to absorb as much information as possible. Dedicated is where you're trying to cement everything that you've learned, and you're really trying to get into that pattern recognition when it comes to answering questions. So my dedicated period was kind of broken down into 3 things: flashcards, questions, and videos. And that was it. That was all I ever did. Flashcards, questions, and videos. Most days I would start with questions. So I would start with generally 80 to 120 UWorld questions. So that's broken down into what we would call blocks. So the USMLE Step 1 test, the exam itself, is broken down into 7 40-question blocks. So what I was doing was I was practicing staying focused for blocks of 40 questions. And the question bank that I was using during my dedicated period was almost exclusively UWorld. UWorld is the gold standard question bank for the USMLE Step 1, and luckily RCSI provides us with a 6-month subscription to UWorld. So then after I did my kind of 2 to 4 blocks of questions, then I would review the questions. So that would be going through all the explanations, pointing out where my weak areas were, and then saying, okay, this is how I can improve in these areas. Okay, I understood where that went wrong. I didn't understand where that went wrong. And then that would bring me into videos. So if there was something that I was consistently getting wrong, or consistently I was noticing, hey, I'm getting a lot of questions wrong on antiarrhythmic drugs. Let's say I'm getting a lot of questions wrong on antiarrhythmic drugs. I had a week where I was really struggling with my antiarrhythmics. I would then go through and say, okay, Sketchy was a good resource for pharmacology. I'll watch the Sketchy videos on antiarrhythmics. And then I would do some questions associated with that topic. Like the Sketchy website has some questions on it, so I would usually do those ones. Or I would go back and do some of the ones that I just did to try and cement that a little bit more. And then I would move on to the next topic if I was struggling with something else. And then last but not least, I did flashcards. I was doing probably in the upwards of 500 flashcards a day. A lot of days I was hitting 800, and there were quite a few days where I hit over 1,000. And I used the flashcards from USMLE RX. A lot of people in my class used the Anki flashcards, and they specifically used the Zanki decks that you can find online. So they didn't like make their own flashcards. They would download flashcards from the internet and then do them. So then the last thing I'm going to talk about specifically with dedicated is practice tests. I did a practice test every Saturday from my first week of dedicated until the week before my test. I did practice tests that were NBMEs. NBME is like a practice test website that's associated with the USMLE directly. So they're old USMLE questions that have either been thrown out because they're not good questions, or they are not incorrect, but they're not the best way to ask the question, or they're old and no longer used. So I used some of the free ones and some ones that I paid for. So I did NBMEs 13, 19, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. And then UWorld also has a couple of practice tests, 2 practice tests. So I did both of those, and then I also did the free 120. And it's 120 questions, 3 blocks. So now I'm gonna get into what I did the week before my test. So the week before my test, I covered pathoma chapters 1 through 3 one more time. That's kind of where the basics of pathology come into play. It's really important to understand those 3 chapters, because if you understand those 3 chapters, you can work your way through other questions. The other thing I did over that week was the rapid review 500 flashcards from USMLE RX. And then I also went over a bunch of my incorrect questions from UWorld. The day before my test, I took the full day off. I stress knit the whole day. I think that's really important because for me, having taken the test, there's nothing that I could have covered in the day before the test that would have helped me on test day. So then the day of the exam. On the day of the exam, I packed snacks, I packed lots of water. One thing that I did that I really loved was I had one of my thermoses, like one of my, people know I love my Yeti water bottles, and I've got like a Yeti coffee mug that keeps everything hot. I filled that with hot tea, and on my breaks, I kept my hot tea in my locker and I would just sip it the whole time. And then breaks. So I ended up taking a break either every block or every other block. So I think for my first 2 blocks, I did them back to back, and then I took a break, and then I started taking more frequent breaks because I wanted to push through and then start staggering out my breaks a little bit more. Your break strategy is something that's definitely got to be personalized to you, and is something that I would practice during your practice tests. I would practice taking your breaks. So now, if you've made it all the way to the end of the video, this is where I'm gonna share with you a little bit more about Cram Fighter. And I reached out to them saying that I was gonna make this video, and I had no idea if they were gonna respond back, but they responded back and said, hey, we would love to be a part of this video. So they have offered you guys 15% off your Cram Fighter subscription if you use the code TerraMed20. I'll write it up here on the screen. That's TerraMed20. I'll also put it down in the description box below with the link to the Cram Fighter website. It is valid until September 30th at midnight Eastern Standard Time. That's September 30th, 2020 at Eastern Standard Time. Cram Fighter was kind of what really helped me make sure that I was staying on track at the end of my pre-dedicated, especially after medical school moved online. They really helped to make sure that I was staying focused and that I was getting through all of my material every single day. You can get 15% off using the code TerraMed20. So that is all from me. I hope you liked this video. Leave me a thumbs up, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and leave me a comment asking me questions. Is there anything I did not cover about the USMLE that you guys want to know about? But until then, until next time, I will see you guys all on Sunday for Tunes with Tara, and I'll see you all later. Bye for now.